planting lovers and Woodfordians, please welcome Wayne.
Thank you for that. Yes, I'm very passionate about orchids. That probably comes from my father. He started me into the orchid world many, many years ago when I was a child. We used to visit rainforests and have a look around. And my passion has sort of gotten quite bigger in the last 7 to 8 years. I now have about 3,000 plants in my collection, and I've got just a small selection of some of my stuff here. What I'll do first is we'll look at the orchids that are on site, the flowers that have been, photos of flowers that have been taken by Anne, Mary and Celia. Then I'll go to some of the plants that are on my property, and then also I'll go into some of the plants and flowers that I've taken when I've been out in the bush. So first of all, this is on site, Cymbidium matidum. That's the seed pods. I'm not sure where that is on the site, but quite an interesting plant. That's probably a self-pollinating plant, which means it doesn't need insects, it just pollinates itself, which is why you get so many seed pods. There's a close-up of the pods. Here we have the Cymbidium matidum flowers. You'll find them up in the mountains. They'll be all through. If you're looking around, you'll see them. They'll just look like a bit of grass growing out of a fork of a tree or out of a crack in a tree. They are quite common. Then we go into Dendrobium kingianum, which again you'll find them probably up behind here, up at Mount Glorious. There's a lot up there. I've seen them up there in flower. Not a particularly nice flower up there, but all the same. There's quite a lot there. There's probably thousands of them up there. You'll see them at Mount Motha, south of Gympie, Bunya Mountains. So they're quite a common plant. You just need to know where they are. And here's a photo of a kingianum in flower on site. Quite a neat little flower, that one. If anyone's got questions, just put your hand up and I can try to answer them for you. Also, Dendrobium speciosum, there's quite a lot of them on site. Again, they're quite common in the area. You'll find them up in the mountains, Mount Glorious, Mount Mee, and speciosum, you'll find them from the northern part of Victoria right up through to the Cape York. Different varieties. Down south, there's Dendrobium speciosum variety speciosum. In this area, there's speciosum variety Hillii, and every type of speciosum is quite different. I'll show you a few more photos of them a little bit later. Here's another speciosum on site. If you look closely, you can see the roots. It's actually quite a happy plant. That looks like it's in a fig tree somewhere. Another speciosum. See the roots climbing all over the tree. Again, doing very, very well. That's a good sign. If you put plants in a tree in your garden, if you can see the roots spreading out, you know it's actually quite happy. Here's another speciosum on site. Quite a good flowering, that one. I'm guessing that's speciosum variety Hillii, but I can't be 100% sure, which is from this area. And that's a close-up of the flowers. Again, easy to grow. If you go to an orchid show and buy a speciosum, stick it in the fork of a tree. So long as they get morning sun, they'll generally do quite well. And the conditions suit them here. It doesn't matter if it gets cold, they'll be fine. This one is on site. It's definitely speciosum variety Hillii. The speciosum variety Hillii is quite long canes, can be 1.5 meters. The flowers, big long flower spikes, but the flowers are generally quite cuppy, closed up, smaller, and that's probably the least favoured of all of the speciosums for orchid growers. There are some good examples of them around, but they're quite rare. Here we have on site Dendrobium delicatum. Delicatum is a primary hybrid between Kingianum, which you saw earlier, and Dendrobium speciosum. So if you are in an area where there's a lot of Kingianums and a lot of speciosums, you'll often find Dendrobium delicatums. It's a natural hybrid. It just happens a native bee will visit a speciosum flower and then visit a Kingianum flower, and you'll get the hybrid which will grow. And you know that they're different. They'll be 50% between the speciosum and the Kingianum flower. There's a close-up of delicatum. I've not seen a delicatum in the wild. I know where they can be found, and one day I'll go see if I can find them and take some photos of them. Also on site we've got Dendrobium bigibbum, which is interesting. They're a far north Queensland plant. They don't like the cold. They don't like the wet. Well, cold. They don't like being cold and wet. But if you grow them in a shade house here, if it's uncovered, they'll probably drop all their leaves. But if you grow them outside on a tree, which I do, I've got some at home growing on trees, they don't lose their leaves. And that probably comes down to the fact that if there's breezes around, the breeze will dry the plant out quickly in the morning, so they don't stay cold, so therefore they don't drop their leaves. Very interesting, but definitely a tropical plant, but they will grow here with a bit of care. There's a close-up of the flowers. Here I've got here one of my plants. That's Dendrobium moringa. It's been produced by some orchid growers. That is 50% Dendrobium speciosum and 50% Dendrobium bigibbum, which you can see the colour in there, the purple comes from the bigibbum. That will never happen naturally because bigibbum flowers in March, April, speciosum flowers in August and September. But a grower has taken pollen from either bigibbum in April and put it onto a speciosum in August and ended up with the moringas. Quite a nice plant to grow, that one. The moringas are one of my favourite hybrids. Again, you won't find them in the wild because it just won't happen. Also on site is Dendrobium discolor. These again are a central Queensland up to North Queensland plant. They grow as far down as Agnes Water or 1770. I've seen them at 1770 in the rocks there. Very hardy plant. They can be found growing in sand, which is incredible. Their canes can be up to 2 to 3 metres long. Again, to grow them here, to grow them in a shade house, if they got wet and cold at night, they will drop every single leaf. And after a number of years, they'll end up dying. But to grow them outdoors in a tree where they get good sun and good light, they actually will do quite well. There's a photo of the flowers here, a little bit blurred. I've got a little bit better photo later. Also on site is Dendrobium gracillicaule. They can be found up in the mountains behind here. Ocean View, Mount Mee, Mount Glorious. Quite a common plant. Easy to grow. Put them on a tree, stick them in the fork of a tree. So long as they don't get midday to afternoon sun, they will do quite well. I've got quite a few at home. These are quite expensive to buy too. They're hard to get, and yes, growers don't sell them cheaply. Yes, gracillicaule again. Gracillicaule will hybridise with speciosum. They will grow together, and you'll get the hybrid between them. It's called Dendrobium gracillumum. Again, it'll be halfway between the gracillicaule and the speciosum flower. This is on site again. That's more a northern plant, Dendrobium lichenastrum variety prentisii. You can see a small flower there, and that's the flower there. The flowers are no bigger than your little fingernail. Still interesting plant to grow. I've got some of that at home. I think this is Dendrobium amylum. I'm not 100% sure. Again, you'll find them in the forest. If you're walking through the forest at Mount Mee, Ocean View, if you're up here, that's possibly naturally occurring. You find them on brush box trees. If you look up the brush box, you'll see these plants all the way up. There'll be hundreds of them at times. There's a lot of them at Mount Mee, up near the falls, if you know the falls at Mount Mee. You walk in there, start looking up, and you'll see them. If you see them when they're in flower, it'll look like it's snowing. There'll be that many flowers that it just looks quite incredible. Plectorosa tridentata, they call that the tangleroot orchid. There's one of them over here near the toilets. If you have a look in there, you'll see him growing. The plant's about that long. You'll see all these roots. They call him the tangleroot because you'll often see them hanging out of trees by one root. They'll have 20 roots and there'll only be one root attached to the branch, and it'll just be hanging there happily. Again, easy enough to grow in your garden. I find this interesting that this grows and flowers on site. Not really the conditions for Sarcochilas hartmannii. They love mountains. I've not seen these in the wild, but very happy here. You can tell that the plant, the leaves are flashy, the flowers are looking good, so that's quite a good one to have on site. This looks like it's naturally occurring on site. I've had a good look at this. I've blown it up. I think it's Dendrobium lingiforme, the tick orchid. Again, very common. If you wander around in the bush, you'll often see that all over the place. Again, finding orchids in the wild, if you just acclimatise your eyes, start to look for something that looks slightly out of place, and you'll think, oh wow, there's an orchid. And then once you've seen one, you'll see lots of them. This is my yard or my block. I've got 1.25 acres in Woodford. I bought the block in 2014. I started planting trees in 2015, and I've planted about 500 rainforest trees, callistemons, banksias. The black cockatoos love my banksias. They will destroy them. You'll have a nice banksia growing with lots of flowers. You'll know that the black cockatoos are there, and you go back down and have a look, and just about everything's gone. But that's what happens naturally, so I don't have a problem with that. That's my bigibbum growing on a tree in the garden. Again, if I had that in the shade house, probably every single leaf would be gone. They just don't like being cold and wet in winter. That's another bigibbum. Dendrobium discolor in my garden. They call it the golden orchid because the flowers can be quite golden, brown. There's one variety that the flowers are yellow. There is also quite a rare variety where the flowers are red. That's my discolor again. A lot of these are quite small plants that I've bought just as little kikis, put them on the tree, and some of them are this long now, so over a couple of years. This is not in my garden, but this is Dendrobium discolor in the footpath in Brisbane. I just happened to be driving past one day, saw it in flower, pulled over. That's about 2 metres off the ground, the base of the plant. The plant's at least 2 metres high, so the flowers are 4 metres off the ground. So I would suggest that if you put some discolor in your trees, put it low to the ground so that when it flowers, you can actually see the flowers and not have to climb the tree to see them. That's a close-up of that one. That was quite an impressive plant and doing very, very well. This is Dendrobium monophyllum growing in my red cedar. My red cedar is about 8 metres tall now, planted in 2015. Again, Dendrobium monophyllum, little yellow flowers. You'll see them up in the mountains, Mount Mee, fairly common. Again, there's a little bit better view of the flowers there. Here's my Dendrobium lingiforme, which I've got growing on my Fladersia schottiana, doing quite well. You can see the roots climbing up the tree. Again, when they flower, it just looks like it's snowing. Lots of white flowers that look very, very impressive. Again, some more lingiforme on a Casuarina glauca. Dendrobium schoeninum, it's one of the pencil orchids. Again, put them on a tree and they should grow quite well. Some of these plants that I've got, you can drive along the roads, up to Jimna or wherever, you'll see a tree down or a hoop pine down on the side of the road. Check it out. There could be orchids on it. They're only going to die, so I've removed some of them and just put them on my trees at home. So people would suggest that that's not the right thing to do, but I don't know, there's two thoughts there. I'd rather see the plant survive and not die. Dendrobium gracillicaule growing in one of my Casuarinas. Speciosum variety Hillii growing on my blue condong, and another Speciosum variety Hillii. Again, these are the ones you find in the area. And I went into an area that was being logged, the hoop pine forests that get logged. I sometimes go into there on weekends when the logging's not happening, and you'll find little tiny plants growing on the trees that have been cut down, and I'll just remove them, take them home and put them on my trees. Again, there's two thoughts as to whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but I think it's quite okay. Here's a Speciosum variety Hillii, which I found in flower at Mount Glorious. That plant would be about that round. Absolutely amazing to see that in flower. It probably had 100 flower spikes at least on it. Very, very impressive. Again, these things only flower for 1 week of the year, so you've got to time it pretty well to find them in flower. Here's what they call the dove orchid, Dendrobium cruminatum. It actually comes from Christmas Island in Papua New Guinea. I've got that growing on one of my she oaks. These orchids flower after you have storms. They need a drop of 10 degrees Celsius in a 1 hour period to initiate flowering. Then within a few days you'll have the plant covered in flowers, and the flowers last for 1 day. So you've only got flowers for 1 day, then they're gone. And it can flower 3 to 4 times a year. So if you get a drop of 10 degrees in a single day, 3 or 4 times a year, it will flower every time. Again, to have a plant that only flowers for 1 day, whether you want that in your trees or not, but I quite like it. A Dendrobium delicatum, a natural hybrid again, growing in my tree. Here's some Dendrobium kingianum in flower at Mount Glorious. Small flowers, quite cuppy, but nice colour. And more kingianum at Mount Glorious. When I went up there and found these, there was, like I said, probably 2,000 to 3,000 plants just everywhere. It was quite amazing. I know where that spot is, and I'll probably go back one day and have another look. Dendrobium gracillumum growing in my native frangipani Speciosum variety by Gracillicaule. Here's a gracillumum in flower at Mount Glorious, which I found, a primary hybrid, which is grown itself from Speciosum and Gracillicaule. That was quite a good find. So it should be still there, flowering happily away. Here's a gracillumum that I bought. Quite nice flowers. Plectorhiza brevilabris, growing at home. That came off some hoop pines that had been felled. There's some of them over here as well. Quite a nice plant. Smaller flowers, but interesting. And there's some seed pods on my plant at home. So it's growing quite happily, which you can see the roots growing up the tree. Succochilus falcatus, growing at home. If you go to Mount Glorious, to where the toilet block is up there, where the park is, if you look up where you park your car, the trees above you, if you look up, it will be full of Psychocholis falcatus. They're everywhere. And unless they're in flower, you probably won't see them, but look closely and there'll be hundreds of them. So quite a common orchid, beautiful flowers. I don't know if I've got any photos of them. Dendrobium tetragonum, they call that the spider orchid. Again, you'll be walking through the bush, unless you know what you're looking for. They can be growing below eye height on trees. I was told about a big population of them at Noosa, in the Noosa National Park, and I was told where to go to see them. And I went in there and I spent 3 hours looking for them. Come home, I rang this fellow and I said, they're not there. And he said, they're there. So I went back a week later and I was looking eye height and above. I spent an hour looking for them again, stopped and thought, well, what am I doing wrong? And I looked down and here's one in front of me below eye height. I was just looking too high. They were all below knee height and below eye height. And there was hundreds of them there and I just missed them. Cymbidium matidum, which I've got at home, which is the one that's here. Again, flowers of the matidum, quite nice. Phyos tankervillii variety australis, the swamp orchid, quite rare in the wild now, but there's a lot in collections and they get passed around through orchid societies. This is in my garden, likes moist areas, and that's it again. Quite easy to grow, but they need to stay wet. Spathylogotis plicata, it's a terrestrial orchid. Again, they come from North Queensland. Very easy to grow in your garden. If you go to orchid shows, you'll see them on sale. There's Spathylogotis plicata in flower. In fact, if you go to Creek at Morayfield, the Creek Nursery, the native plant nursery, you can buy them there, put them in your garden and you'll have colour. Those flowers are about that big, quite nice. You can get different colours too. Sporanthes australis. These things, that's in my yard. I was mowing earlier this year and I saw a flash of pink in front of me, stopped the mower, stopped the ride on, and that was growing in my yard. And I had a look around. I found 4 flower spikes. Most of you will probably have these in your yard. You just don't know they're there because the flowers get mowed off before they get a chance to bloom. The flowers are quite tiny, but the native bees will visit them. Very nice to have. So I've probably got more than 4. I've just mowed the rest of them off. And you'll see the little leaves are about that long, quite fleshy. When I lived at Strathpine, I had about 200 of these growing in my yard. They were just naturally occurring. I did a weed and feed and killed a lot. I wasn't thinking, so don't weed and feed. They don't like it. Again, these, Geodorum densiflorums, the pink nodding orchid, these are occurring naturally in my garden. They've just come up themselves. If you look around, you may see them. I saw them this year flowering in the shopping centre car park at Morayfield. I just happened to pull up in front of Aldi there, looked over to the garden, and there was about 50 of them growing in the garden. Now, I don't know whether they're naturally occurring or whether they've been put there. I'm guessing that they're naturally occurring. So I've got about 5 or 6 in my yard that have just come up themselves. Again, look around, you may see them. They call them the pink nodding orchid because the flowers nod. They face down. That's a close-up of the flowers there. Now we'll get to some plants, photos of plants that I've taken in the bush. I only saw this about 3 weeks ago, Oberonia titania. This was taken on a bushwalk I did up at Condalilla Falls. I had 2 people with me. Shelley, my partner Shelley, was one. I said, it's not far. You walk down to the bottom of the falls and keep going for about 1 kilometre and we'll find them. Well, 5 kilometres later, I sort of made a mistake. So my companions weren't very happy with me, but that was there in flower, very tiny flowers. That plant is about that big, but very, very interesting to see in the wild. This was there. I can't pronounce the first word. It's hilii, very fleshy plant. I saw about half a dozen of them in there, about eye height. That's it in flower. Very, very impressive plant. Then these were there, Dendrobium tetragonum, variety tetragonum. There's a few different varieties of them. That's another one there. Again, that's at the base of the tree, like it was growing way down here, quite a big plant. Calanthe triplicata, there was a lot of them up there. They call that the Christmas orchid. It flowers at Christmas time. If you're walking through the bush at Christmas time and you see a big flash of white, that's its flowers there. It'll be the Christmas orchid. Generally, if you see one, you'll see 100. Again, Mount Me, Ocean View, Mount Glorious, up at Condalilla, very, very common. And very impressive when they flower. This is some photos of plants I took up in central Queensland. I was up there last August chasing the speciosums. There's a Dendrobium speciosum there, and underneath it is a Sarcocholis falcatus in flower. That was the falcatus, that was a plant of about that size. Very, very impressive plant. That's another one I found on a rock wall up there. Another one, that's the same plant, close up. This area is very well known for Dendrobium speciosum variety grandiflorum. The plants can grow to this big. The flowers are much, much bigger than the helii you get around here, and they're yellow to golden. Very, very impressive. And the flowers can be quite open. So they make a good plant to grow. This is me leaning up against a big rock wall up there with a humongous speciosum in flower. That's another one up there. We spent 8 days up there photographing the speciosums when they're in flower. We probably saw 2,000 plants in flower. Probably the trip of a lifetime. That's just something that would be hard to replicate. Some of these, it took us like, we were doing 10 kilometres a day, walking up ravines, up gullies, across cliff faces, through 2 to 3 kilometres of lantana to get to some of these, just to take photos. Encountered one enormous taipan, but from me to my mate here, with taking care of this away. Probably the biggest snake I've ever seen, but luckily he didn't want to have anything to do with us, and he wandered off. So, but it was well worth it. There's one growing in trees. We only saw about 4 of these speciosums growing in trees up there. Just about all of them were growing on rock, around streams and on cliff faces. There's one flower that I took off a plant just to take a photo of. Unfortunately, it's slightly blurred. I was hanging on to it, trying to take the photo. But if you can imagine a speciosum with 30 spikes of flowers, 200 flowers per spike, and they're all this size, very, very impressive. Something that was very common up there is the black bootlace orchid. These things grow in rotting timber, so if a tree dies, this somehow gets in there, it will grow, and then it will find a tree to grow up. It has no leaves, and it will flower up the tree, thousands of flowers. And there's a close-up of the flower. We saw hundreds of these up there. When that tree that's rotting eventually rots away, that plant will die. They call it the bootlace orchid because of the stem that you can see going up the tree there. This is up there too in central Queensland, Dendrobium amylum. Sarcocholis ceciliae, Very, very common up there. Thousands of plants. There's some flowers there. And that's it. Those were all taken in one area up in central Queensland. So, any questions? Yes.
You talk about the way in which the different plants sort of adapt to different places and propagate. Have you sort of figured out anything about the sort of the intelligence of plants?
Yeah, take them around. No, I don't know much about that. There's a couple of plants there, Bulbophyllum McPhersonii, which I grow, and also Bulbophyllum minutusum, which is the smallest orchid in the world, and you'll find them growing in the tops of hoot pines. So if you see a hoot pine if you're wandering up, like say Jimna Way or Mount Glorious or whatever, and have a look at the branches that are on the ground, you may actually see that, but you've got to have good eyes to see it, and you may miss it. This here is one of my plants. That's got 25% begibbon, hence the purple colour. The 75% of the rest of this plant is from Papua New Guinea. It's a Laturia type, small plant, big flower, quite impressive. Yeah, you can just show it around. Just be careful with the flowers and they're not out yet. Unfortunately, they've probably got 2 or 3 days to go. And that's another Laturia from Papua New Guinea, which I have. Not quite Australian, but close enough. And these flowers will last for about 3 months, whereas a speciosum flower and a lot of these other flowers will only last for a week. This plant here, those flowers will last for 3 months, which is why growers like to have them, because they just stay out. Again, if you're interested in orchids, look for the Laturias. They will be long lasting. Any other? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, like obviously you've got yours on trees, but I don't have any trees. I'm in a
Yep.
sort of unit. You know, what sort of medium to grow them in and what size pots and when to...
Yep, okay. So for our native orchids, the smaller the pot, the better. That plant can stay in there for another year at least, for another growth. You don't want them to be in too big of a pot. They don't like it. They'll get too wet. See, that is quite good for him, and he can stay there for another year at least. This guy looks like he's overcrowded, but he's not. That's good for him. So you don't want too big of a pot. Again, if you can't put them on the tree, buy a hanger. Hang them from the tree. This fellow would be quite happy hanging under a tree, gets morning light. He wouldn't like afternoon light. I use a small bark mix. You can buy good quality barks from good nurseries, and I use 4 parts bark to 1 part charcoal in the mix. And you don't want them to stay in the mix for more than 3 years. That starts to get too long. The mix will break down and the plant may die. So 2 to 3 years, then shift them either into the same pot with new mix or slightly bigger pot. And I've got 3,000 orchids. This year I repotted in September, October and November. I repotted 1,500 plants, and that took a long time. So yeah, it's probably a bit too many. But if you've only got half a dozen, they're a lot easier to look after. But use a hanger. There's metal hangers you can get. Put him in a tree, hang him in a tree. Any of the plants that you buy will do quite well in that sort of environment. In summer, once a day, either late afternoon or very, very early in the morning. In winter, once a week at the most. you would never water them in the late afternoon. You'd always water them on a sunny day, if it's going to be sunny, 8 or 9 o'clock, just as it's starting to warm up, because you don't want your plant to be cold and wet in winter. So summer afternoon, winter in the morning on a warm day, warmish day, like when the sun is going to be out. So 23, 24, 25 degree day, give him the water in the morning. But definitely summer, a lot of these will like a water once a day. Beg your pardon?
Sorry. Can you divide them?
Yes.
And when would you do it in the year?
You would do it in spring or a little bit later, spring into summer. You'll divide them. This plant, because I number my plants, this plant's numbered A, 1428A, which means that there's a B around somewhere. I've got a second one of him, which I'll either keep or I'll sell at some point. So, yep, they can be divided, but you make sure that if they're heading in two different directions, split them down the middle and then pot them up in two separate pots. But this one I wouldn't divide, it wouldn't do him any good. He'd probably go backwards. I'd wait till he got quite a bit bigger. He may even be coming off this way in another direction, but give it a couple of years. And that's really good for plants that are quite valuable. Means that you've got a second one. If something goes wrong with your original, then you've got a second one. Yep.
Lowland areas,
Yes.
like in southeast Queensland?
Yep, you should be able to. You should be able to grow that in lowland areas. They do like the high country, but give them the right conditions. Make sure the sun doesn't get to them. They should be fine. Yeah. Again, if you're wandering around, driving up to a forest somewhere and you see trees on the ground, you could very well find one or two on the tree. I've found a lot over the years that have been sunburnt. Once they hit the ground, the sun gets to them and kills them. So, any more questions? Beg pardon? How do they? They got very, very microscopic seeds, very fine. When the pot opens, the seeds will just blow out. And if they hit a tree and stick there, so the tree probably needs to be wet, then they need they need a fungi on the tree as well to be there for the seed pod to germinate. If the fungi's not there, they won't germinate. Well, you could. Well, you could, but you wouldn't be able to grow them yourself. You'd need to take them to someone who knows what they're doing, and they'll put them in a jar, and then they'll grow them in a jar. And but I don't know how to do that myself. But you can buy orchids in a flask. There'll be little tiny plants, 20, 30, 40 plants in a flask. If you know what you're doing, you can take them home, take them out of the flask, pot them up, and hopefully get them to grow. I'm not necessarily so good with that. I've had some successes. I've had 30 or 40 plants grow out of a flask, and I've had some flasks where there's been 30 or 40 plants and I've had one live. So, and you pay $80 for a flask, that's an expensive plant. So any more questions?
When you were talking about travelling around the central Capricornia region, were you, say, at Byfield, or were you further inland up in the mountains? Just as an idea.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily like to say where we were. There are certain individuals which will go into an area and rape and pillage. Yeah, so as much as I'd love to say where that was, because it'll be good for people to see, there are people, and they'll do it, and they'll take thousands of plants. Which,
Coastal or mountains, I guess?
yes. High country. High country.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just up there, that's all.
Oh, were you?
Love the area.
Well, Blackdown, if you go to Blackdown National Park, I've been there a couple of times. We actually went there after we were here. We spent 2 days in Blackdown. There's a lot of speciosums up there. They're called speciosum variety Blackdownants. Speciosum variety grandiflorum will grow this high, the canes. Blackdownants grow this high. And they flower off a plant this big. But to find them there, you'll see them on the walks. They'll be up on the rocks, and the flower spikes will grow about this long. So that's a good place to see them in flower in August. And very hard to get to, so no one's going to take them because, yeah, they won't get at them. So if you want to see some in the wild, and Blackdown National Park, magnificent place to visit, just the wildflowers there. It's just phenomenal. So many wildflowers, native grand orchids, which I've got a lot of photos of them. I didn't bring them today, but a lot of native grand orchids in flower up at Blackdown. A very, very good spot to visit, and you can camp up there as well. So, any more questions?
Do the orchids compete? I mean, like, you've got one orchid on one tree, but do other orchids compete for that tree? Or?
Oh, they don't compete. They'll just find their own spot and they'll just grow. So, but you'll get some trees, you'll find a tree, there might be 20 speciosums on it. And when you see that, it's pretty impressive. They just find their own spot. Yeah.
It's just about gentleman's question about, are they intelligent? I mean, do they avoid their competing flower heads?
I don't think they can avoid. They just land and grow. The hilly eyes around here like to grow on trees. You will find them at Mount Mee, near the waterfall there on the rock, if you know where you're looking. But the grandiflorums, Speciosum grandiflorum in central Queensland, they, besides a few, grow all on rock. Yep.
Where's the bees at that time of day? Or shall we say native bees?
Well, they flower for one whole day, so they'll stay out for one day. Yep, so wherever they grow naturally, there must be something that lives there that will all come in, pollinate and then leave. So I've had none. I've had mine for 10 years. It's never been pollinated, so obviously whatever pollinates it isn't here, you know, so.
What kind of potting medium do you use for the fires?
For the fires, bit of bark, bit of sand, some native plant mix, like potting mix. I think about 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, and they should do quite well. They like to stay moist, so. But the mix still needs to be free draining. That nothing likes to sit in moisture. So. Any more? That's about it. I'm not sure. I may. I could always come back because I'm not that far away. So yeah, I may come back for the walk. Yep. Yep. What time is the walk? 2 o'clock. Don't forget that the Broncos are on at 4 o'clock. Yeah, I'm a member of the Australian Native Orchid Society Carby group. If you're interested in native orchids, that's a good group to belong to. We meet at the Gbung RSL the second Tuesday of every month, except for January. Yeah, 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock is a good time to get there. But we call ourselves the Australian Native Orchid Society. We're the Australasian group, so we include stuff that comes from Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and so our boundary takes in that area as well. So hence why you'll have stuff from Papua New Guinea in the group. And if you're interested in orchids, if you go to orchid shows, I was at an orchid show yesterday down at Redcliffe, there's always plants for sale. So if you're interested, and we have a big show in August at the Lions Hall at Launton, and there's always lots of plants for sale there.
Thank you.
That's it?
Yes.
That's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and it was good to hear about orchids and see what, where we can find them and how not to kill them. That's very